The wind doesn't always move the way it should. Sometimes it rushes through the trees without warning, carrying a gust that settles too suddenly. Other times, some places just feel different. You step into them and something shifts. The air gets heavier. The silence stretches too long and you can't shake the feeling that someone's watching. The Irish have always believed these places aren't empty. They belong to the Aos Sí, the hidden folk. They aren't spirits, but they aren't human either. They're something older, something that never really left. Their world runs alongside ours, just out of sight. Sometimes they help, sometimes they harm, but they don't like being ignored. People have called them a lot of things: the good neighbors, the fair folk, the people of the mounds. No one says their real name carelessly, because once they notice you, they never forget. Some believe they're the last trace of an ancient world, a time when they ruled Ireland before humans took over. Others think they've always been here, just watching from the edges, slipping in and out of sight. Either way, they're figures of mystery. Even now, in the quiet places, in the hills and forests that people avoid after dark, there exists a presence that just can't be explained. This is the story of the Aos Sí, the hidden gods of Ireland. Long before the world as we know it took shape, before the first stones of castles were laid and the names of kings were written into history, Ireland belonged to another kind of people. They were not mere mortals, but a divine race of gods. Ancient, powerful, and deeply tied to the land itself. The Tuatha De Danann were their name, a people of great knowledge, skill, and magic. Some say they came from across the sea, arriving in ships that burned away as they touched Irish soil, leaving them no path of retreat. Others claim they came from the skies, descending in a great mist, as if the land itself had summoned them. However they arrived, one thing was certain: they were unlike any who had come before. For a time they ruled Ireland, not with brute force, but with wisdom and power beyond human understanding. They were poets, warriors, healers, and sorcerers, able to shape the world around them with a mere thought. They brought prosperity, knowledge, and a deep connection to the forces of nature. The mountains, the rivers, the very earth, these were not separate from them, but a part of who they were. But no rule lasts forever. The world changes, and those who believe they are eternal often find themselves swept aside. A new people came to Ireland, the Milesians, the ancestors of modern-day Irish. Unlike the Tuatha De Danann, they were fully mortal, but they were strong, determined, and destined to claim the land as their own. War was inevitable. The battle between these two peoples raged across the hills and valleys, a clash not just of swords, but of magic, fate, and the will of the land itself. The Tuatha De Danann fought fiercely, wielding power that could command the wind and call forth storms. But the Milesians were relentless, and they had one great advantage: the world was shifting in their favor. The age of the Tuatha De Danann was fading, and the age of men had begun. Defeat did not mean destruction, though. The Tuatha De Danann were too deeply rooted in the land to be erased. Instead, a compromise was made, an agreement that would shape Irish folklore for centuries to come. The Milesians would claim the world above, the lands bathed in sunlight, the forests, the fields, and the mountains. The Tuatha De Danann, in turn, would take the world below. They would retreat into the earth, into the hollow hills, the hidden places where human feet rarely tread. And so the Tuatha De Danann disappeared from mortal sight, but they did not die. They became something else, something unseen, something whispered about in quiet voices around the campfire and in the rustling of leaves on still nights. They became the Aos Sí, the hidden folk, the ones who still walked the land though they were rarely seen. They were no longer kings and queens of Ireland, but they were far from powerless. They had their own realm now, just beyond human reach, and though they had been pushed aside, they were never truly gone. The places where the Aos Sí found refuge became known as the Sí, and they were more than just underground dwellings. They were something else entirely, gateways to a world untouched by time, where the Aos Sí continued to rule in secret. The Sidhe were often thought to exist within the hills and mounds that dotted the Irish landscape. Some were little more than grassy knolls, rising gently from the earth, while others stood like ancient fortresses, silent and watching. To the unknowing traveler, they seemed like nothing more than natural landforms, but those who understood the old ways knew better. These were not ordinary hills. They were doorways, thresholds between the world of men and the realm of the Aos Sí. It was said that to step inside one was to enter a place where the rules of time and space no longer held sway. The air shimmered with an unnatural glow, the sky stretched impossibly high, and the land itself pulsed with a quiet, humming energy. There, great palaces stood, carved from stone and glowing with an eerie light, their halls filled with music that drifted like mist. The Aos Sí did not dwell in crude burrows beneath the earth. They lived in realms of splendor, where the air was heavy with magic and every hall was filled with mystery. But the Sidhe were not just places, they were portals. They did not always stay in one place, nor were they always visible. Some days, a hill was just a hill, and then, under the right conditions, perhaps a mist rolling in at dusk or a certain alignment of the stars, it would reveal itself for what it truly was: a hidden kingdom. A world overlapping with our own, just out of reach. Legends warned against disturbing the Sidhe. The Aos Sí did not take kindly to trespassers, and those who entered uninvited rarely returned the same. Some came back speaking in strange tongues, unable to recall their own names. Others returned after what felt like mere hours, only to find their loved ones long dead, and their homes crumbled into ruin. And some never returned at all. Because of this, the ancient Irish treated these places with great reverence. They avoided building on them, and when roads were constructed, they would often curve around certain hills rather than cut through them. Farmers knew better than to plow the land too close to these sites. Even now, many of these places remain untouched, not because of superstition, but because of something older, an unspoken understanding that there are places in the world that do not belong to us. The Aos Sí were not trapped beneath the earth, waiting for the right moment to break free. They had chosen this realm, had shaped it to their liking, and in many ways, it was far grander than the world they had left behind. But they had not forgotten what had been taken from them, and though they no longer ruled over men, they had not severed their ties to the land. The Aos Sí were never simple creatures of flesh and blood. They were something older, something tied to the land itself, and because of that, their appearances were not always fixed. They could be as beautiful as a dream or as terrifying as a nightmare, and sometimes they were both at once. Those who encountered them spoke of beings who were just close enough to human to unsettle the mind, as though they had stepped from a world that was like ours, but not quite. Many descriptions of the Aos Sí compare them to the elves of later European folklore, and it's not hard to see why. They were often depicted as tall and impossibly graceful, their movements unnaturally smooth, as though they glided rather than walked. Their features were sharp, high cheekbones, angular faces, eyes that seemed to hold more color than the human eye should be able to perceive. Their skin was said to shimmer not with light, but with something else. Something like the reflection of moonlight on water, shifting and elusive. The eyes of the Aos Sí were perhaps their most striking feature. Some said they were unnervingly large, bright like burning embers or dark like a bottomless well. Others described them as constantly changing, shifting in color and depth, like the sky before a storm. A few legends claim that if one were to meet the gaze of an Aos Sí for too long, they might forget themselves entirely, as though drawn into something far older and more powerful than their own mortal existence. Their hair, too, was often described in extremes, long and flowing, shimmering like gold, silver, or the deepest black. It was not bound by mortal aging. No matter how much time passed, the Aos Sí always remained untouched by age or decay. Some were said to braid their hair with fine strands of silver, while others let it move freely, as though it had a life of its own. But beauty was not their only form. Just as they could be alluring, they could be utterly terrifying. When angered or provoked, their features could shift into something that sent even the bravest warriors fleeing in terror. Their once beautiful faces could twist into hollow masks, their mouths stretching too wide, their fingers growing too long, their eyes turning into nothing but pits of shadow. In these moments, they were no longer the regal figures of forgotten kingdoms, but something far older, something that did not take kindly to disrespect. Not all Aos Sí appeared in a humanoid form. Some stories tell of shapeshifters, beings who could take the form of animals, crows, black dogs, deer, hares, or even foxes, always watching, always just out of reach. But there was always something off about them. A deer whose eyes held too much intelligence, a crow that watched with unsettling patience, a dog that did not blink. It was said that if you encountered such a creature on a lonely road at night, it was best not to stare too long, lest you catch the Aos Sí's attention. There were also those who appeared only as shadows, flickering at the edges of vision, never fully seen, but always felt. Some encountered them as a sudden chill in the air, a presence that pressed against the edges of consciousness. In some accounts, they did not walk at all, but instead stepped out of nothingness, appearing where they wished, moving between the spaces that mortals could not perceive. Their clothing was as strange as their forms. Some were said to wear robes woven from mist, others were clad in armor that shimmered like polished stone, reflecting no light yet gleaming all the same. A few were described as wearing garments that seemed to shift and change. One moment, deep green like the forests, the next the pale gray of storm clouds. The most noble among them were sometimes said to wear crowns of silver and gold, adorned with gems that glowed with an inner light. But no matter how they appeared, there was always something unnatural about them, something that set them apart from mortals. Even in their most beautiful forms, there was an air of otherness, a feeling that they were not bound by the same rules as men. It was this strange duality, the ability to be both captivating and terrifying, that made the Aos Sí so feared and revered. And if you were ever to meet one, if you ever found yourself staring into their shifting, unknowable eyes, you would understand why the old stories always came with warnings. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. The Aos Sí were not bound by mortal notions of good and evil. They were not demons to be feared, nor were they guardian spirits watching over humanity. They were something older, something that followed their own rules, their own ways. Their nature was as shifting as the wind, sometimes generous, sometimes cruel, always unpredictable. To understand the Aos Sí, one must set aside human expectations. They did not act out of kindness or malice as mortals do. Their actions were dictated by an ancient sense of balance, laws that were never written down yet could never be broken. Some believed they upheld the old order of the world, ensuring that the natural and supernatural remained separate, that no one, mortal or otherwise, strayed too far beyond their place. Others saw them as capricious, their tempers as wild as the sea, their moods as changeable as the seasons. At their core, the Aos Sí were creatures of power and pride. They remembered a time before humans walked the land, a time when they ruled over Ireland's hills, forests, and rivers. Though they had long since retreated into their hidden world, they had not forgotten. Their presence was still felt, and their influence still lingered in the places where the veil between worlds was thin. Unlike mortals, the Aos Sí were not separate from nature. They were nature, intertwined with the land in a way humans could never be. The forests, the rivers, the rolling green hills. These were not just places to them, they were part of their very being. A broken tree, a polluted stream, a hill leveled to build a road. These were not just insults, but direct offenses against their kind. Many believed that certain places belonged to the Aos Sí, sacred groves, ancient stone circles, lone hawthorn trees standing in the middle of fields. These were not to be touched, not to be disturbed. Houses were built with doorways that never faced a fairy path, and even roads were sometimes diverted to avoid sacred hills believed to be the entrance to the otherworld. The Aos Sí were fiercely protective of these spaces. To trespass without respect could invite their wrath. Crops might fail, livestock could fall sick, or worse, a member of the household might disappear without a trace, lost forever to the otherworld. But those who honored their lands, who made small offerings of milk or bread, who whispered words of respect before crossing into their domain, these people might find themselves blessed with good fortune. The Aos Sí did not hate humans, but they did not fully accept them either. They saw mortals as fleeting things, temporary, fragile, creatures of dust and bone. Some Aos Sí were curious about them, fascinated by their short lives, their endless need to create, to build and to shape the world. Others resented them for taking over lands that had once belonged to their kind. There are countless stories of mortals who have crossed paths with the Aos Sí, and no two are ever quite the same. Some tell of accidental encounters, of a traveler who stepped unknowingly into their realm, only to return home and find that 100 years had passed in a single night. Others speak of deliberate interference, of those who sought their favor and paid the price for it. And then, there are the tales of those who were simply taken, plucked from the mortal world and spirited away, never to be seen again. One of the most feared interactions between mortals and the Aos Sí is the changeling. The belief that the Aos Sí steal human infants, replacing them with one of their own. The changeling child might appear normal at first, but over time something feels wrong. Their eyes are too sharp, their laughter too knowing, their cries more like an animal's wail than a human child's sob. Desperate parents in old Ireland took drastic measures, exposing the child to fire, leaving them on a hillside overnight, or whispering ancient charms to drive the Aos Sí from them. But whether such actions ever truly worked is another matter entirely. And yet, not all encounters end in tragedy. There are stories of those who have been blessed by the Aos Sí, a lonely musician given a song so hauntingly beautiful that it made even the stones weep, a farmer who tended his land with respect and found his fields thriving beyond measure, a lost wanderer who stumbled upon their realm and was guided safely home. But these gifts are always dangerous. The Aos Sí do not offer kindness out of generosity. Everything they give, they can just as easily take away. Some mortals attempt to bargain with them, believing they can strike a deal, that they can outwit creatures older than time. Few succeed. The Aos Sí are bound by their own laws, their own strict sense of balance, and any agreement made with them must be honored. Many who made bargains with them did so out of desperation, a dying man seeking a cure, a farmer praying for good harvests, a warrior asking for victory in battle. And sometimes the Aos Sí granted these wishes, but their blessings were rarely simple. A wish fulfilled might lead to greater misfortune down the road. There are tales of men who wished for wealth and found their gold turned to leaves by morning, of warriors who asked for strength but found their own lifespans cut short, and of kings who sought their favor in war only to lose everything they held dear. And if a mortal tried to break a bargain, the Aos Sí were merciless. A deal made was a deal kept, and those who tried to escape their promises often met far more terrible fates. Curses, sickness, madness, misfortune, or even a slow unraveling of their life until nothing was left. Then there are the silent encounters, perhaps the most unsettling of all. A lone traveler on a misty road sees figures standing in the distance, watching, unmoving, just at the edge of sight. A fisherman at sea hears faint music drifting across the waves, though no boat is in sight. A family living in an ancient house wakes to find chairs moved, doors open, laughter echoing down empty halls, but nothing more. They are simply there, present but unseen, a reminder that they have never left. They were keepers of an older order, a reminder of a time before human dominion over the land. They ensured that the old ways were not forgotten, that the balance between their world and ours remained undisturbed. Some believed they were the protectors of sacred knowledge, the keepers of forgotten wisdom. Others thought of them as gatekeepers, standing between the mortal world and something far older, far more dangerous. Whatever the truth, one thing remained certain: they were never to be taken lightly. They were not friends, they were not foes, they just simply were. And for those who crossed paths with them, for those who strayed too close to their hidden world, there was always a price to be paid. The Aos Sí were not bound by the same limitations as mortals. They did not live and die as humans did, nor were they constrained by the laws of nature. They existed in a space between, untouched by time, hidden from sight, moving between worlds as easily as a shadow slips between light and dark. Their power was not just in what they could do, but in what they were. Beings tied to the land itself, as much a part of Ireland as its rivers, forests, and rolling hills. The Aos Sí were known for their supernatural abilities, which could be both wondrous and terrifying. Their magic was subtle yet powerful, operating not through grand displays, but through quiet influence, the bending of reality in ways that humans often failed to understand until it was too late. Perhaps the most well-known ability of the Aos Sí was their use of glamour, a form of enchantment that allowed them to alter perceptions. They could make themselves appear impossibly beautiful, shift the appearance of landscapes, or make the mundane seem magical. A crumbling ruin might look like a grand palace under their spell, or an ordinary ring of stones could be transformed into an entrance to their world. But glamour was more than just illusion. It could affect the mind itself. A mortal caught in their enchantment might forget time, lose their sense of direction, or even fail to recognize their own family upon returning home. The Aos Sí were believed to have power over luck, both good and bad. A person who pleased them might find themselves suddenly prosperous, crops flourishing, livestock thriving, a run of fortune that seemed almost unnatural. But those who offended them, they were marked by a different kind of fate. This misfortune was rarely immediate. It began slowly, almost unnoticeably. Milk spoiling too quickly, tools breaking for no reason, whispers heard in the wind. But over time, it would grow. Illness would strike, homes would fall into disrepair, children would vanish without a trace. Some families were said to be cursed for generations, their misfortunes rooted in the mistakes of a long-dead ancestor who had wronged the Aos Sí. Though they rarely revealed the full extent of their power, the Aos Sí were tied to nature in ways humans could never fully comprehend. Some stories spoke of them controlling the winds, calling forth sudden storms, or causing the air to go unnaturally still. Others claimed they could command the waters, stirring rivers into fury or calming seas to a glassy stillness. The Aos Sí were particularly linked to certain places: forests, lakes, standing stones, and, most importantly, the mounds and hills. In these locations, their power was at its strongest. They could manipulate the land itself, shifting paths, making roads disappear, or ensuring that those who entered their territory never found their way out. For all their power, the Aos Sí were not invincible. There were certain things they could not stand, rules they could not break. And for those who knew these secrets, there were ways to protect oneself. Like many supernatural beings, the Aos Sí were said to fear iron. This was no ordinary fear. It was an intrinsic weakness, something that disrupted their very essence. A simple iron nail placed above a doorway could keep them from entering a house. An iron horseshoe hung above a stable would protect livestock from being stolen or cursed. Travelers often carried small iron blades or nails in their pockets. But iron was not just a defense, it was a weapon. A blade made of iron could harm them, something that few other things could do. But wounding one of the Aos Sí was a dangerous act. Even if a person succeeded, the retribution that followed would be swift and unforgiving. Salt was believed to act as a natural barrier between worlds. Sprinkling it along windowsills and doorways was thought to keep the Aos Sí from entering a home. Some believed that drawing a circle of salt around oneself could prevent them from getting too close. But this was not foolproof. If the circle was broken, even slightly, the protection was lost. Despite their unpredictability, as long as you followed certain rules, unspoken laws, interactions with the Aos Sí could be relatively safe. Never accept their gifts without caution. A favor from the Aos Sí always came at a price. To take without understanding the cost was to invite disaster. Never speak ill of them. Even saying their true name aloud could bring their attention. People often called them the good neighbors, the fair folk, or the hidden ones, hoping that flattery might keep them at bay. Never enter their world without permission. There were places where the boundary between the mortal world and the other world was thin. Those who stumbled through without meaning to might never return. Always show respect. Small offerings of food or milk, a kind word when passing through their lands, these were the gestures that could mean the difference between fortune and ruin. Never break a promise to them. The Aos Sí despised liars. To break an oath made to them was to mark oneself for misfortune. Time does not pass for the Aos Sí in the same way it does for mortals, but the world around them has changed. The ancient hills where they once held dominion still stand, the rivers still flow, and the wind still carries whispers of their presence. But the people who once knew them, who feared them, who honored them, have shifted their ways. Civilization has risen, cities have sprawled across the land, and the old ways have faded into memory. The question remains, what became of the Aos Sí as the world moved on? There was a time when the Aos Sí were woven into everyday life. But as the old gods were forgotten, as Christianity spread across Ireland and Scotland, as folklore turned into mere stories for children, the Aos Sí seemed to withdraw. Some say that their power diminished with the loss of belief. The more people forgot them, the less they could influence the world. Without prayers, without fear, without respect, their connection to the land frayed. Their hidden cities became harder to find. The grand courts beneath the hills grew silent. The Aos Sí, once rulers of the unseen world, became little more than whispers on the wind, lingering in the shadows of a world that no longer acknowledged them. Yet, others argue that the Aos Sí have not vanished at all. They have merely adapted. If the Aos Sí truly lost their hold over the land, then why do their warnings still linger? Why do people still instinctively hesitate before stepping too close to a fairy mound? Why do stories of strange encounters still surface from time to time, passed down in hushed voices, always with the same message? Be careful, be respectful, and do not call them by their name. Some believe the Aos Sí retreated deeper into their realm, sealing themselves off from the mortal world to avoid the chaos that came with progress. Roads were built over their sacred places, forests were cut down, the rivers were reshaped by human hands, and so they withdrew, watching from a distance, waiting. Others believe they never truly left. They simply changed the way they interact with the world. They no longer appear in grand processions or claim entire villages under their rule, but they are still there, hidden in the cracks between things. A flicker of movement in the corner of one's eye, a sudden hush in the middle of a busy street, a dream that feels too vivid, too real, as if someone was calling from just beyond the veil. And then there are those who claim to have met them. Even in the modern world, stories of the Aos Sí persist. People still report strange lights dancing over the hills at night, drifting like will-o'-the-wisps, leading those who dare follow into places that seem to shift and change when they look away. There are still tales of travelers who disappear for days, only to return with no memory of where they have been, speaking in odd rhythms, their eyes distant, as if they had glimpsed something beyond human understanding. There are even those who believe that the Aos Sí have taken new forms, disguising themselves in ways that allow them to move unnoticed among mortals. Some say they walk among us, appearing as strangely beautiful people with unsettlingly perfect features, their eyes too bright, their presence too heavy. Others believe they still guard the old places, ensuring that those who disrespect their lands, those who dig where they shouldn't, build where they are not welcome, pay a terrible price. Though the world has changed, those who know the old ways still tread carefully. Farmers still hesitate before cutting down certain trees. Villagers still avoid some roads after dark. Even in the age of reason, there remains a quiet, lingering superstition, not quite belief, not quite fear, but something in between.